Saturday evening, 6:47. Holden Ashworth stood alone in the foyer of Ashworth's on Broad, a weathered 1983 menu in his hand. Preston Vale's eyes moved down the green flannel, the worn jeans, the scuffed work boots. His smile was cold. "Sir, I'm afraid we don't have a reservation under that name." Holden held out his phone. "Confirmation email, 6:45, party of 2. Preston did not look. "Our dress code is listed on our website. I'd suggest the cafe down the block." The old menu slipped from Holden's hand and landed on the marble floor. Neither of them bent to pick it up. Holden did, finally. He crouched slowly, lifted the menu, brushed the dust from its cover, and slid it under his arm. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He only nodded once to Preston Vale. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked out through the heavy oak door. Out on the sidewalk, the Charleston evening was soft and humid, the light on Broad Street the color of amber. Behind him, a couple in evening wear stepped up to the entrance. Through the glass, Holden saw Preston's entire posture change. A bow, almost. A sweeping hand. The couple was led straight to the window table. Holden kept walking. 2 blocks up Meeting Street, in the little pocket park near the old post office, Junie was sitting on a wrought iron bench, swinging her feet, next to Mrs. Hattie Monroe. Hattie had been watching Junie since the week after Elise died. 3 years ago now. She was 68, wore a cardigan in any weather, and had a way of being quiet that soothed the child. The plan had been simple. Holden would confirm the reservation, check the menu, make sure the table was ready, then come back and walk Junie through the door himself. Junie had woken up early for her Saturday drawing class. She was tired. He had wanted her to have 20 still minutes before the evening began. This was the first time he was going to take her to her great-grandfather's restaurant. Hattie stood when she saw him. "All set, honey?" Holden hesitated. He looked down at Junie, who was still drawing in her lap notebook. Then he gave Hattie a small smile that did not reach his eyes. "Actually, Hattie, change of plans. I'll take Junie home. Thank you." He pressed $40 into her hand, thanked her again, walked her to the corner where her grandson waited in an idling sedan. Then he sat down next to Junie. She looked up. "Daddy, aren't we going to the restaurant?" "I brought the menu." She held up her own copy, the one he had photocopied, and slid into a clear plastic sleeve so she could carry it without tearing it. Elias Ashworth's signature sat on the cover, faded and sloping, dated 1983. Holden crouched down to her level. "Junebug, they're full tonight. Busy Saturday. We'll come back another day. How about ice cream instead?" She studied him. She was 8, and she was her mother's daughter, and she knew when a grown-up was choosing his word. But she nodded. "Okay, gelato?" He laughed, and it came out rougher than he wanted. Gelato. Inside the restaurant, Marin Caldwell had seen the tail end of it. She had been standing near the wine station reviewing a sommelier's notes when she'd caught the man in flannel turning toward the door, something about his shoulders. She came out to the foyer, but the sidewalk beyond the glass was already empty. She turned to Preston. "Who was that man? Why did he leave?" Preston's answer came without a pause. "Walk in. No reservation. Didn't meet dress code." Marin checked her tablet. She scrolled the reservation log for 6:45. Nothing. She scrolled again. The system showed one cancellation at 6:45 minutes before the man had walked in. Her eyebrows drew together. Who canceled it? Probably the guest himself. I didn't handle it. She wanted to push further. Saturday was the busiest night of her week, and the dining room was already turning. She filed the question in the back of her mind and went back to the floor. Holden and Junie sat on a park bench across from a little gelato cart, each of them holding a paper cup. Junie ate in slow, thoughtful spoonfuls. The street lamps were coming on one by one along Meeting Street. "Daddy?" she said, and then waited. He waited with her. Did they really not have a table? Or they didn't want us? He could have lied. He almost did. He watched her for a long moment, and then he decided she was old enough for the truth. The small version of it. "I think someone there decided he didn't want me, before he even knew who I was. That's not fair." "No, it isn't." She opened the plastic sleeve and touched her finger to the photocopied signature. "Then why didn't you tell him?" Holden had no good answer. Inside the Ashworth's kitchen, Dalton Rees, the head chef, happened to be passing the small window that looked out over the sidewalk on the far side of Broad. He saw, in the space of 2 seconds, a man in a flannel shirt carrying a small child across the curb 2 blocks down. He did not see the face. He only caught the walk, the set of the shoulders, and something in his chest went tight. He stopped chopping. He turned to his sous chef. "Who was out front at 6:45? "Preston." "Why?" Dalton did not answer. He pulled off his apron, laid it on the prep counter, and walked toward his office in the back of the kitchen. Holden carried Junie the last block to the old Ford F-150. By the time they reached it, she had fallen asleep on his shoulder, the menu pressed between her chest and his. He glanced back once toward Broad Street. The Ashworth sign glowed warm against the purpling sky. Inside the restaurant, Marin watched from the front window as 2 shadows crossed beneath a street lamp and vanished. She tapped her tablet. "Pull all canceled reservations tonight. Send to me." Sunday morning, Marin was in her office at 8. She opened the laptop and ran the 30-day cancellation report. She filtered for cancellations made within 10 minutes of the reserved arrival time. The list came back at 14 entries. She read the names. Every last name was ethnic or unusual. Every address was in North Charleston, West Ashley, or Johns Island. 11 of the 14 bore the same marginal note: no, show. She sat very still. She scrolled the list a second time. A third. This was not coincidence. She picked up her desk phone and called down to the kitchen. "Dalton, can I get 10 minutes with you after the lunch shift?" "My office." Out in North Charleston, Holden was in his workshop on King Street Extension. He was working on an 1890 Cherrywood highboy, its drawer pulls laid out in a careful row on a canvas cloth. Junie sat on a stool in the corner, sketchbook open on her knees, drawing the curl of the shavings as they fell from his plane. His phone rang. New York area code. He declined it. 5 minutes later, a new email pinged into his inbox. From Harlan Briggs, Chair, Ashworth, Restaurant Group Trustee Board. Subject: Q. 2 Charleston Flagship Performance Review requires your signature. He set down the plane and opened the attachment. Revenue up 8% for the quarter at Ashworth's on Broad. Then a flagged line in red. Guest complaint trend. Dress code discretionary denials up 31% year over year. Board recommends an audit. He read the line 3 times. He thought about Preston Vale's smile. Junie looked up from her sketchbook. "Daddy, great-granddaddy started the restaurant, right?" "He did, honey." "So who does it belong to now?" Holden went still. He put down the rag in his hand. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he did something he had not done in 4 years. He told her plainly, "To us, Junebug. It's ours. Has been since Grandpa died." Her spoon of a face went through several expressions at once. She blinked. "Then why didn't they let us in?" Holden had no answer to give her. Late that afternoon, Dalton Rees sat across the stainless steel prep table from Marin Caldwell. The kitchen was empty between services. Marin slid him a printout of the 14 cancellations. Dalton read it without expression, nodded slowly. "I've been telling the board about Preston for 3 years. They tell me he's indispensable." "Indispensable to whom?" Dalton was quiet. Marin tried another angle. "There was a man here last night. Flannel shirt. He came in at 6:45. He left without being served. I couldn't catch up to him. Do you know who he is?" Dalton looked at her for a long time before answering. "Marin," he said, "some things I can't tell you. Not yet, but trust your instincts. And when you look at Preston's cancellation log, don't just look at the timestamps. Look at the IP addresses. Why can't you tell me? Because I made a promise to a friend 31 years ago, and I keep my promises." He stood up, pushed in his chair, and went back to his line. Marin walked back to her office. She shut the door. She opened the IP log on the reservation system. All 14 cancellations. Same IP address. The terminal at Preston's maitre d'hotel. Monday morning, Marin called Preston into her office. She asked him, in calm and careful language, to walk her through his standard protocol for handling last-minute cancellations. Preston obliged. He was fluent. He was confident. He cited policy chapter and verse. He offered, unprompted, that he was always happy to train the younger hosts on the system. She thanked him and let him go. She did not mention the IP log. The moment the door closed, she typed everything he had said into a document and saved it to a folder she had titled simply Case. In his workshop, Holden put down his plane at Junie's request. "Daddy, can we go back to the restaurant?" "We'll go back, honey. Give me a little time. Not to eat. I just want to see the wall." He looked at her. He remembered. In 1983, when Elias Ashworth had opened Ashworth's on Broad, he had carved his name into a single walnut panel by the entrance. Right hand, pocket knife, Saturday morning before opening. The panel now sat behind the maitre d' stand, framed in brass. Holden had not stood in front of it in more than a decade. "I'll go first. Tuesday lunch. When it's quiet, I'll make sure the coast is clear. Then we'll go together. Promise?" "I promise." Tuesday, 2:15 in the afternoon. Holden walked into Ashworth's on Broad in the same flannel, the same boots. Preston was not at the stand. Tuesday was his lunch-off. A young hostess in her early 20s greeted him. Marin happened to be crossing the foyer with a clipboard. She saw Holden and stopped mid-stride. She recognized him instantly. She stepped forward before the hostess could speak. "Welcome back, sir. Table for one?" He nodded. She walked him to a two-top by the tall window that looked out onto Broad Street. He did not sit down right away. "Could I have a minute of your time? I wanted to apologize for leaving so abruptly Saturday night." She stopped. Her hand was still on the back of the chair. "You don't owe anyone an apology. I owe you one. What happened Saturday should not have happened." She sat down in the chair across from him. Not the posture of a manager, the posture of a peer. "Can I ask the little girl I saw you with? Your daughter?" He nodded. "She's 8. She wanted to see her great-grandfather's signature." Marin's face went still. Her great-grandfather's signature. He inclined his head toward the maitre d' stand. On the walnut panel, behind that brass frame, Elias Ashworth, 1983. She turned her head. She looked at the panel. She had walked past that panel 4 times a day, 5 days a week, for 4 years, and she had never once read it carefully. She had assumed it was decorative, historical, a piece of the room's bones. She turned back to Holden. She did not ask the next question, but her eyes had changed. "I'm not here to make anything difficult," he said. "I just wanted to see how the place runs on a normal day. For my daughter. Stay. Order anything. On the house." He shook his head. "No. I'd like to pay, and I'd like the same service every other guest gets. Nothing more." She nodded slowly. She stood up and signaled for a server, a young man named Paul. "Paul, take care of Mr. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Holden. Holden Ashworth." Marin did not let her face change. 4 years of managing fine dining had trained the reflex into her. She said, evenly, "Welcome to Ashworth's, Mr. Ashworth," and walked back across the floor. In her office, she closed the door and sat down and exhaled for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and typed, "Elias Ashworth, founder, Charleston." She read for 40 minutes without looking up. What Marin found in 40 minutes was what anyone with patience could have found. Ashworth Restaurant Group was a privately held, limited liability company. No public ownership disclosure, no shareholder registry, only a named board of trustees. Harlan Briggs, chair, of Briggs & Copeland in Charleston. 4 other members, all with law or finance credentials. There was an older piece, a 1996 profile in a Charleston business weekly, scanned poorly, with a single black and white photograph of Elias Ashworth standing in the doorway of the original restaurant. A tall man, flannel shirt, work boots, a serious face. The resemblance to the man who had eaten a Caesar salad in her dining room at 2:15 yesterday was not subtle. It was not a question of chin or of nose. It was the stance, the same hands at the same angle. She read the piece twice. She closed the laptop. There was no way to confirm whether Holden Ashworth of North Charleston was the owner she had been working for. Not without asking him directly. And she would not ask. Not until she was sure he wanted her to know. What she could do was the work in front of her, so she went back to it. In his workshop that afternoon, Holden was hand-sanding a drawer front when Junie climbed onto the bench beside him. She had a question in her face. "Daddy, did you see the signature?" "I did. It's still there. Can I see it?" "This weekend. I promise. But this time we'll be ready." "Ready how?" He set the sandpaper down and looked at his daughter for a long moment, ready to walk in like we belong. She nodded slowly. She leaned her head against his arm and watched him work. Wednesday morning, Preston was back at the stand. Marin watched him the whole shift from the mezzanine. She timed the interactions. 8 seconds for guests in jackets, 23 seconds for guests in jeans or open collars. 3 times that single shift, he told a table walking in off the street that they were fully booked. Marin checked the system each time. Each time, there were open tables. She pulled out her phone and began taking screenshots. A folder on her phone filled up, time-stamped, cross-referenced. Thursday afternoon, Harlan Briggs called Holden. Video, not audio. Briggs had been the Ashworth family's counsel for 30 years. He had drafted Holden's father's will. He had handled the transfer of the company to Holden in 2019. He was one of perhaps 4 people in the world who knew who owned the restaurant group. Holden, Briggs said, the Q2 complaint audit is back. There's a pattern at the Charleston flagship. Discretionary denials. I'd like your sign-off to hire an outside firm to investigate. Hold off. Give it 2 weeks. Holden, I want to see it from the inside first. Holden, you're the owner. You don't have to play detective. Harlan, my granddaddy built that place for families. All families. If something's wrong in there, I want to see it with my own eyes, not read about it in a report. Briggs exhaled. 2 weeks. Then we move. Thursday night, 11 p.m., Marin was the last one in the restaurant. She walked past the maitre d' stand on her way out. She stopped. She stepped closer to the walnut panel. She read the carved inscription carefully for the first time. Elias Ashworth, founder. Broad Street, Charleston, 1983. For my son and his sons and all who will sit at this table. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned, flipped the last switch, and stepped out into the warm Charleston night. Saturday came around again, 7 in the evening. Holden and Junie stood on the sidewalk outside Ashworth's on Broad. Junie wore a pale blue dress, white shoes, and her mother's silver chain with the small cursive E. Holden wore flannel. Clean flannel, pressed. He had ironed it himself. They walked in together. Preston was at the stand. He saw Holden, and his face went white for a single heartbeat. Then it hardened. Sir, as I mentioned last week, Preston, I'll take this one. Marin had come around from behind the wine station. Her voice was quiet and final. She stepped between them. Mr. Ashworth, Miss Ashworth, your table is ready. Window side. Follow me, please. Preston's mouth opened. Marin, a word. After service, Preston. She did not look back. The window table was the best 2-top in the house. Junie slid into her chair and looked around at the tall ceilings, the chandeliers, the white linen. She whispered, Daddy, where's the wall? Marin set the menus down gently. Sweetheart, after your dinner, I'll take you to see it. Your daddy told me about your great-grandfather. Junie turned to Holden. She knows? She knows enough. Across the floor, the kitchen door swung open. Dalton Rees walked out onto the dining room floor. He had not set foot in the dining room during service in 3 months. Every server on the floor tracked him with their eyes. He walked straight to Holden's table. He put his hand on Holden's shoulder. Holden. It's been too long. Holden stood up, and the 2 men held each other in a short, hard embrace. Junie watched, confused. Holden sat down and gestured. Junebug, this is Dalton. He knew your great-grandfather. He's been cooking in this kitchen since before I was born. Dalton leaned down, hands on his thighs, so his eyes were level with hers. Your great-granddaddy hired me in '82. He made me promise, with a handshake, that I'd feed anyone who walked through that door with the same respect. Some folks forget that promise. I don't. His glance shifted, briefly, toward the maitre d' stand. Then he straightened up and went back to his kitchen. The dinner was long and slow. Marin served 2 of the courses herself. Holden talked about the Cherrywood High Boy, about Elise, about how she had been diagnosed in 2021 and gone in 8 months. Marin talked about her mother's Parkinson's, about night shifts in New York, about the small Savannah kitchen she had grown up in. Junie drew Marin on a napkin, discreetly, while the adults talked. After dessert, Marin stood up and held out her hand to Junie. Come on, sweetheart, let's go meet your great-grandfather. They walked to the walnut panel. Junie reached up and traced the carved letters with her index finger. She did not cry. She only took in a long, careful breath and held it, the way a person holds a prayer. Holden watched from the table. He paid the check with his personal credit card. The name on the card read H. Ashworth. The thermal receipt printed on the POS. Marin's eyes flicked to it. She did not react. She only nodded. Preston saw it too. From 30 feet away, the flicker of recognition crossed his face, and then the careful control. He went home that night, opened his laptop, and typed into the search bar, Ashworth Restaurant Group Ownership Succession 2019. He read until 3 in the morning. Sunday. Preston arrived at the restaurant at 7 a.m., 2 hours before his shift. He logged into the reservation system. He tried to clear the IP history from the terminal. He did not know that Marin had already saved an offline copy the week before. He went further. At 8, he placed a call to Randall Croft, one of the 5 trustees. Croft was not Briggs. Croft was a softer man, a consumer goods lawyer who had been angling for a larger role on the board for years. Preston had cultivated him over coffee meetings since 2018. Preston said, with perfect reasonableness, that Marin Caldwell seemed to be making emotional decisions in the Charleston flagship. He wondered aloud whether the board should look into her judgment. He suggested, regretfully, that she might have become a liability. Croft listened. At 1 p.m., Marin's phone rang. It was Harlan Briggs. Marin, I'm hearing about internal tension at Charleston. Want to tell me what I'm hearing? She took a breath. She made a decision. Give me your email. I'll send you everything tonight. She sent the IP log, the screenshots, the timed interactions, the case file, the cancellation report. Briggs was silent for 30 seconds on the phone after the files landed. Marin, send me everything. And Marin, do not tell Preston anything about anything. That afternoon, Junie showed Holden a drawing, the walnut panel, the carved signature, a little girl standing in front of it. Daddy, great-granddaddy wrote, "For all who will sit at this table," but they didn't let us sit. Holden pulled her onto his lap. That's why we're going to fix it. Sunday night, after the restaurant had closed, Dalton called Holden and asked him to come down, not to the dining room, to the small, cramped chef's office at the back of the kitchen. Dalton opened the old Mosler safe in the corner. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound notebook. The spine was cracked and taped. The pages were soft from handling. Your granddaddy told me something in 1994. He said, "Dot, if you ever see this place, forget what it's for. Write it down. Don't tell anyone but an Ashworth who asks." I've been writing. Holden opened the notebook. The first entry was dated November 1995. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. Every entry was a guest Preston had turned away in 11 years. Date, time, a short description. The total, as Dalton had counted it up himself in pencil on the inside of the back cover, was 247. The final entry, though, was not a turned-away guest. It was a note. March 2024. Overheard Preston on his phone outside the back door. He told someone, "I'm skimming 40 a month. They'll never notice." Wrote this down same night. Holden read it twice. He looked up at Dalton. "Why didn't you take this to the board?" "Because I promised your granddaddy I'd only give it to an Ashworth who asked." "Tonight you ask." Holden closed the notebook. His hand was not entirely steady. He took out his phone and called Harlan Briggs. Harlan, Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Full board meeting at the restaurant. I want Preston there. I want Marin there. I want Dalton there. Holden, you want to be there in person? I want to be there as the owner. He drove home afterward. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for 10 minutes. Elise's photograph was clipped to the dashboard, the one from the Folly Beach trip the summer before her diagnosis. "Elise," he said quietly, "I've been quiet too long. Junie deserves to see me stand up." Wednesday, 10 a.m., Ashworth's on Broad was closed for the hour. The private meeting room behind the kitchen held the full trustee board, Briggs and 4 others, Randall Croft among them, Marin Caldwell, Dalton Rees, and Preston Vale, who had been summoned that morning without being told why. Holden walked in last. Flannel, boots, the leather notebook tucked under his arm. Preston looked at him and blinked. Briggs opened. "Good morning. This is an ownership review meeting. For those of you who have not met him in person, I'd like to introduce Mr. Holden Ashworth, sole owner of Ashworth Restaurant Group since 2019. Preston's face lost all of its color at once. Holden sat down at the head of the table. He did not raise his voice. Preston, 2 Saturdays ago, you refused to seat me and my daughter. You told us our clothes didn't meet your dress code. A dress code that, per our written policy, doesn't exist. We've only required smart, casual attire for 45 years. Preston's mouth opened. I'm not finished. Marin, please. Marin stood up. She walked the board through the IP log. The 14 cancellations in 30 days, all from Preston's terminal. The targeting pattern by last name and address. The timed interactions. The 3 phantom full houses on a single Wednesday. She laid each printed screenshot flat on the table in a neat, deliberate line. Then Dalton stood up. He placed the leather notebook in the center of the table. He walked the board through the 11-year record. 247 guests turned away. Names, dates, descriptions. He turned to the last page. He read the March note aloud. Briggs spoke next. His voice was level and terrible. Preston, we've also pulled the deposit reconciliation records for the past 24 months. There is a $340,000 discrepancy between guest-side deposit refunds issued and accounting-side deposits recorded. Would you like to explain? Preston stood up. His voice cracked. You have no idea what it takes to protect the reputation of this place. The people I turned away, they wouldn't have fit here. I was doing what your grandfather would have wanted. Holden stood up. Slowly, Mr. Vale. My grandfather was the son of a shrimp boat captain from Edisto Island. He built this restaurant because every fine dining room in Charleston turned his family away in 1962. He carved into that wall, for all who will sit at this table. You didn't protect his legacy. You betrayed it. The room was silent. Randall Croft looked down at the tabletop. Preston Vale. Your employment with Ashworth Restaurant Group is terminated, effective immediately. Harlan will walk you out. The matter of $340,000 is being referred to the Charleston County Sheriff's Department this afternoon. Preston stood with his hands shaking at his sides. He opened his mouth. He closed it. A uniformed security officer stepped in from the hallway, placed a hand at Preston's elbow, and walked him out. The door shut behind them. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Holden turned his head. Randall Croft looked up. You spoke to Preston on Sunday about Marin. I have the phone log. Croft opened his mouth. Your resignation from the board. On my desk by end of week. Don't make me ask twice. Croft nodded once, and his face was white. Holden turned then to Marin and to Dalton. His voice softened. Both of you. Thank you. Marin, I'd like to offer you a promotion. Regional Director for our Southeast operations. If you're willing, Marin blinked. I'll think about it. Take your time. Thursday morning. The news traveled through Charleston, fine dining in the way such news always travels, not through the paper but through kitchen back doors and sommelier text threads. Holden declined 3 interview requests by noon. A line cook came up to Marin that afternoon and thanked her quietly, without making a scene. Then a server, then a busser. They had all been spoken down to at one time or another at the front stand. Marin refused the credit. Dalton wrote it all down for 31 years. I just found the folder. That afternoon, Holden brought Junie back to Ashworth's. The 3rd time. No reservation. They walked in through the front door at 3 in the afternoon. The new hostess, a 20-something woman in a dark dress, greeted them by name. The staff had been briefed. Mr. Ashworth. Miss Ashworth. Would you like your usual? Holden smiled. Something simple. Grilled cheese for Junie. Caesar for me. Marin came across the floor and stopped by the table. She sat down for 5 minutes. Junie reached into her sketchbook and folded a single page and handed it to her. It was Marin. Hair in a bun. Restaurant apron. A small, quiet smile. It was a better likeness than most of the portraits the grown woman had ever sat for. Marin looked at the drawing. Her eyes went wet. She did not let them spill. She folded the page and slid it into her blazer pocket. Junie said, Miss Caldwell, are you going to stay at the restaurant? Marin glanced at Holden for one beat. I'm thinking about it. The owner offered me a bigger job, but I like it here. Junie tilted her head. Can you do both? Marin laughed, surprised. Maybe. I'll ask him. Holden laughed with her. It was the first time Junie had heard him laugh at a table in a long time. Marin went back to her floor. Holden watched her walk across the dining room, and Junie watched Holden watch her. "Daddy," Junie said, quietly. "Do you like her?" Holden set his fork down. He looked at his daughter for a long, long moment. "I think she's a good person, honey. That's all I know right now." "That's how you started liking Mommy." He did not answer. He only reached across and smoothed her hair back from her forehead. Later, after they had left, Marin stood again in front of the walnut panel. She read the carved words once more. "For my son, and his sons, and all who will sit at this table." She stood there for a long while. The dining room was quiet behind her, the 5:30 guests not yet arrived, the silver being polished at the server's station in the back. A whole restaurant paused between one breath and the next. She turned and went to her office. She sat down at her desk. She did not open the laptop right away. She looked at the small framed photograph on the corner of the desk, her mother, from before the Parkinsons, laughing in a sunflower print dress. Then she opened the laptop and composed an email to Harlan Brigg. She wrote that she accepted the regional director role on one condition, that she retain her general manager position at the Charleston flagship for the first 6 months so that she could personally oversee the restructuring from within the house that had taught her the work. She read the email through twice. She sent it. 20 minutes later, a reply came back. "Holden approves. He said to tell you the founder would have wanted it that way." Marin read the email 3 times before she stood up. 3 weeks later, late November, Holden's phone rang in the workshop. Charleston County Sheriff's Department. Preston Vale had been formally indicted on 3 counts of embezzlement. Preliminary hearing in January. Holden thanked the deputy and hung up. He stood there looking at the finished cherrywood highboy, its new French polish drying under the shop lamp. He did not feel victorious. He only felt tired. His phone rang again. "Marin, are you free Sunday afternoon? Dalton's cooking a staff family meal. Everyone's welcome, including you and Junie. We'll be there." Sunday, 4 p.m., Ashworth's on Broad was closed to the public. One long table had been set down the center of the dining room, 22 place settings, staff and their families. Dalton cooked. Marin poured the wine. A trio from the College of Charleston played bluegrass in the corner. Junie ran around in her stockinged feet with a server's 6-year-old son. Holden sat at the head of the table, not because he was the owner, but because Dalton had pointed him to the chair. Dalton stood up and raised his glass. "For 42 years I've worked in this kitchen. I cooked for Elias. I cooked for his son. Now I cook for his grandson. 3 generations of Ashworths. The promise Elias made me in 1982 is still the promise. Feed everyone who walks through that door with the same respect. Tonight we keep it." Everyone raised a glass. Holden stood. His voice was quieter. "I was quiet for 5 years. I thought quiet was respect. It wasn't. It was fear. Fear of being seen. My granddaddy was never afraid. I'm learning from him, a little late. Thank you, Dalton, Marin, all of you for helping me learn." After the meal, Marin and Holden stepped outside onto the Broad Street sidewalk. Junie walked ahead, stooping to pick up yellow magnolia leaves and sycamore pods. The Charleston evening was cool. "You know," Marin said, "I almost quit the week after it happened. Felt like I'd failed. I was the GM, and I didn't catch it for 4 years. You caught it the same weekend I walked in. You didn't fail. You were the one who found him. 4 years, Holden. 14 families I know of. Probably more I don't." Dalton counted 247 over 11. "You're not responsible for a problem that started long before you took the job." She gave a small, tired laugh. "Are you going to keep coming in flannel? It's what I wear. My granddaddy wore work clothes in his own dining room until the day he died. Said a table that can't seat a man in work clothes isn't a table worth sitting at." That sounds like him from what Dalton tells me. Dalton talks about him? All the time. Not in stories, in the cooking. There's a way he turns a panhandle in. He learned it from your grandfather. Holden was quiet for a moment. They walked for a while without speaking. Junie was 20 feet ahead, arms full of leaves. Then Marin stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face him. "Holden, your daughter drew me last week. I know, she draws people she likes. I don't know what this is, but I'd like to figure it out. Slowly. Slowly is the only way I know." They kept walking. They did not hold hands. They only walked in step. 4 months later, mid-March, the magnolias along Broad Street were coming back into bloom. Ashworth's on Broad was full on a Friday evening. The air in the room had changed. The staff laughed more. No one's eyes flicked nervously to the maitre de stand. The new hostess, Tamika Booker, a Charleston native of 28, who had come up through the hospitality program at the College of Charleston, greeted each guest by name if she knew it, and by care if she did not. Maren had been on the road much of February, Atlanta, Savannah, Raleigh, restructuring the front-of-house training at each of the group's 12 restaurants, rooting out the smaller Prestons before they could grow. Holden had, at Briggs's insistence, signed off on a single short interview with the Charleston Post and Courier, confirming his ownership. He had declined every other interview request. Forbes had called twice. He had not called back. Inside the flagship, 3 people were seated at a corner table. The corner table. Elias Ashworth's table, the one he had eaten at every night of the first 2 years of the restaurant's life. On the wall beside it was a small brass plaque, reserved in memory of Elias Ashworth, founder. For all who sit at this table, Junie, almost 9 now, wore her mother's silver E on its chain. On her wrist, she also wore a slim silver bracelet, a present from Maren for her birthday in January. Junie unfolded a new drawing and slid it across the white tablecloth. 3 people at a table, Junie in the middle, Holden on the left, Maren on the right. No one touched anyone. They were only sitting side by side by side. Maren looked at the drawing. She set her hand down on the tablecloth, not on Holden's hand, but near it. Their fingers did not quite touch. They were only close. The kitchen door opened and Dalton came through carrying a plate. On it was a slice of pecan pie, the lattice work dark gold, the crust a little uneven in the way handwork always is. Elias baked this for the first anniversary of the restaurant, 1982. I've made it every March since. Tonight, I wanted the right people to taste it. He set it down in the center of the table. Holden looked up. Dalton, when are you retiring? Dalton laughed, a dry laugh. When you tell me I've kept my promise long enough, that's not going to be soon. Junie cut the first slice and slid it onto Maren's plate. You first. Later, the 3 of them walked out through the foyer. Junie walked between them, one hand in her father's and one in Maren's. They passed the walnut panel. Junie stopped. She reached up and touched the carved signature with 2 fingertips. She turned her face up to Holden. Daddy, I think great-granddaddy would like her. Holden looked at Maren. Maren looked at Holden. There was no kiss. No declaration, only a small nod from Holden, and a still, listening look from Maren. They stepped out onto the Broad Street sidewalk. Their 3 shadows stretched long under the street lamp. Behind them, the Ashworth's on Broad sign still burned warm against the evening. It had burned there for 45 years. It would keep burning.